My name is Claire Bennett. I was 32 years old, and I was standing in the marble lobby of First Heritage Bank in my black funeral dress, watching my older brother's hands shake as a woman in a navy blazer told him that every dollar he'd tried to move that morning had just been frozen, in my name. Growing up, my family called me the quiet one, the forgettable one, the one who'd never amount to anything more than a paycheck and a rented apartment. They were wrong. They just didn't know it yet. Welcome back to Cherry Revenge Tales. If you're watching this, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're tuning in from tonight. And if you believe in quiet justice, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't beg, just waits, hit like and subscribe before we get into it. 1 week earlier, our father, Walter Bennett, had died of heart failure in a hospital room I'd sat in more nights than anyone else in our family combined. 3 days after he passed, before the funeral had even been scheduled, my brother Grant invited me to dinner at his house, a 6-bedroom colonial he'd financed on promises more than income. His wife Sabrina, Grant made sure to mention that twice. Between bites of a filet mignon I hadn't asked for, he and Sabrina talked about the vacation home they were closing on in April, the new Range Rover in the driveway, how blessed they were, how hard they'd worked. Nobody asked how I was doing. Nobody asked how I'd managed 12-hour hospice shifts and still driven 40 minutes to sit with Dad 3 nights a week for the last 2 years of his life. "You look tired, Claire," Sabrina said at one point, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. Nursing really ages a person. Sabrina topped off her wine and glanced around the dining room, at the crystal chandelier, at the framed photo of her and Grant on a beach somewhere with turquoise water behind them. "It's honestly a little sad," she said, to nobody in particular, "how some people just never figure out how to build anything for themselves. I mean, we don't judge. Not everybody's built for more." I'd learned a long time ago that silence cost me less than defending myself did, and that people who needed to look down on someone rarely stopped just because you asked them to. After dessert, Grant set his phone down on the table and slid it toward me like he was doing me a favor. "So here's the thing," he said. "Dad's estate is a mess, and somebody needs to handle it, and it's not gonna be you, no offense. I already talked to a lawyer. I'm gonna need you to sign off on the house going to me and Sabrina. Makes sense, since we have the kids, we have the space." Just something about the accounts. Grant's been the one managing Dad's finances the last few years, you know that. It's just cleaner, if it all stays with him. I already knew what that meant. I'd seen a notification on my own banking app 3 days earlier, an app I still had access to because 2 years ago, after Dad's first small stroke, he'd quietly added me as a secondary holder on his primary checking account. Not Grant, me. He never told Grant, and he'd asked me not to mention it unless something happened to him. Because in his own words, your brother's good at spending money and bad at admitting it. 3 days after Dad died, $161,000 had left that account in 2 transfers, both authorized by Grant, both routed into an account for his failing construction business. He didn't know I could see that. He also didn't know that Dad had asked the bank, quietly, after that first stroke, to flag the account for elder concern, which meant any withdrawal over $5,000 required both our signatures. Grant had never signed anything jointly with me in his life. He'd simply never needed to. Until now. I'd sat in my car in the hospice parking lot, on my lunch break, reading the screenshots twice to make sure I understood what I was looking at before I made the call, and the woman on the line had asked me one question I still remembered word for word. "Are you listed as a joint holder on this account, ma'am?" I'd said yes. She'd said, "Then nothing else can move without you." "I'm not signing anything tonight," I said. Grant's smile thinned. "Claire, come on. Don't make this difficult." "I'm not making anything difficult. You don't need a lawyer. You need to not be selfish for once in your life," Sabrina snapped, the kindness gone from her voice entirely. "Do you know what Grant has sacrificed for this family? What we've built? And you want to sit there with your little apartment and your little job and act like you're entitled to half of everything Dad worked for." "I'm not acting like anything," I said. "I'm saying I'll look at the paperwork." "You always do this," Sabrina said, shaking her head like I was a disappointing child. "Dad practically raised Grant to run this family." I thought about the 11 o'clock shifts, the medication charts, the nights I'd fallen asleep in a vinyl recliner beside Dad's hospital bed, while Grant sent a card. I didn't say any of it out loud. It wouldn't have mattered to either of them, and I already had somewhere better than an argument to put that information. Grant stood up so fast his chair scraped the hardwood. You've always done this. Sat there, quiet, judging everybody, thinking you're better than us because you play nurse for strangers. Dad barely trusted you with his pill schedule. Claire, you think he trusted you with his money? Grow up. I remember thinking, almost gently, that he had no idea how wrong he was. I want to tell you about something I started doing, about 8 months into caring for Dad, after Grant showed up drunk to a hospital visit once, and later swore he'd never said the things he said that night. I bought a plain black smartwatch, the kind that looks like nothing, and I learned how to start a voice memo with 2 quiet taps without ever looking down at my wrist. I'd used it before, mostly to keep accurate records for Dad's doctors when family members disagreed about his care. That night, when Grant stood up and raised his voice, I rested my wrist against my knee, under the table, tapped twice, and felt the small, familiar vibration that told me it had started recording. I'm not signing tonight, I repeated, calm, my hands folded in my lap. I'll be at the bank tomorrow morning to look into Dad's accounts myself, since I'm still listed on them. The silence that followed was the first real quiet of the entire evening. What did you just say? Grant asked. I said I'm still listed on his face. Not guilt yet, just a flicker of arithmetic, like a man recalculating a number he'd been certain of for days. The funeral was scheduled for 11 the next morning. At 9:15, I was standing in the lobby of First Heritage Bank when Grant walked in. Sabrina, a step behind him, both dressed for the service, both clearly expecting to be in and out in 10 minutes. I already knew why he was there. The fraud department had told me, when I called 2 nights before, that any further attempted withdrawal on a flagged account would trigger an automatic freeze and an immediate review, and that the review would require the secondary account holder's presence. Grant approached the counter and asked to complete a wire transfer. The remaining balance, $42,000, moving into an account under his construction company, before, in his words to the teller, everything gets tied up in probate. The teller typed for a moment, then asked him to wait while she got her manager. He checked his watch. The cutoff for same-day wires was 10 o'clock, he muttered to Sabrina, and if it didn't go through this morning it would sit for days, while lawyers picked through it, and he needed it gone before anyone started asking questions he couldn't answer. He kept glancing at the clock above the teller line, at his phone, tapping his foot the way he used to before a big presentation, back when he still gave those. Sabrina stood beside him with her arms crossed, whispering something about how they needed to make the noon flight arrangements for his business partner, right after the service, how none of this could wait until Monday. A woman in a navy blazer came out from behind the counter, introduced herself as the branch's fraud and compliance officer, and asked Grant to step into a side office. That was when he finally saw me sitting in the waiting area, and his face did something I'd never once seen it do. It lost color, all at once. Waiting, I said. Same as you. The officer, whose name was Denise, didn't raise her voice once through any of it. She laid a folder on the small table between us and explained, in the flat procedural tone of someone who had clearly done this before, that the account had been flagged 18 months earlier at the original holder's own request, following a diagnosed medical event, specifically to require secondary authorization on any withdrawal over $5,000. 2 withdrawals totaling $161,000. Per the account terms, Denise said, looking at Grant, not unkindly, just factually, no further transactions can occur without Ms. Bennett's signature, since she's the surviving co-holder, and the prior funds were removed without her required authorization. This matter has also been referred to our internal fraud team, and depending on their findings, potentially to local authorities. This is insane, Grant said. She's lying. She wasn't even on that account. Claire, tell them this is wrong. Sabrina turned on him first. You told me the money was already legally yours. You told me this was handled. Grant, is this why the construction account? Is this why Marcus has been calling the house every night? Not now, Grant said, his voice cracking down the middle. Is this about the gambling again? She said, and I watched something in her expression curdle from anger into something closer to fear. Not fear of losing the money, but fear of everything else he hadn't told her. Oh my God. Oh my God. Grant, what did you do? He didn't answer her. He was staring at the folder on the table, his hands shaking slightly, sweat visible along his hairline despite the air conditioning, and when Denise asked him to confirm his identification for the incident report, his voice came out thin and unsteady, nothing like the man who'd told me to grow up 12 hours earlier. Sabrina had already pulled her phone out and was scrolling, her face gone rigid, and I heard her murmur the name Marcus again, under her breath like it was a word she was only now understanding the weight of. Nobody in that office was looking at me anymore. Grant looked up at me, and for the first time in my life, I watched him search for something to say and find absolutely nothing. Dad barely trusted you with his pills, I said quietly, gathering my coat, so he made sure I was the only one he trusted with everything else. Then I left him there, in that small office, to explain himself to a woman with a folder and no particular interest in his excuses. If you've ever been the quiet one in your family, the one people underestimated, talked over, assumed would never push back, I want you to hear this. Being calm was never the same as being weak. I didn't win that morning, because I got angry. I won because I'd spent 2 years quietly building something no one thought to look for, while everyone else was busy underestimating me. You don't owe anyone a loud reaction to prove you deserve respect. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay quiet, keep your evidence close, and let other people's greed do the talking for you. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They're just the truth, spoken calmly, one time and then held.